Today, we will talk about the serial killer you've never heard of. During the 1970s, the state of Michigan was shaken by a horrifying and complicated case known as the Oakland County Child Killer. This case involved the kidnapping and murder of at least 4 children who lived in the wealthy suburbs where Oakland County is located. A substantial amount of investigation has been conducted, but the case has not been solved, and it continues to be enveloped in mystery and speculation. Between the years 1976 and 1977, Oakland County, Michigan, was the scene of a string of heinous criminal acts, including the kidnapping and murder of children. After being kidnapped and held captive for several days, the victims, who ranged in age from 10 to 12, were eventually slain. Before we get into it in more detail, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Let's begin. A deliberate and cold-blooded attitude was suggested by the killer's mode of operation, which included painstaking care in retaining the children and washing their bodies before disposing of them. This time period caused residents to experience anxiety and paranoia, which resulted in a significant shift in the community's perception of its own sense of safety. There was a child named Mark Stebbins, who was 12 years old and from Ferndale, Michigan, who was the first known victim. Following his departure from the American Legion Hall on February 15, 1976, Mark vanished without a trace. 4 days later, his body was discovered in a snowbank, carefully laid out with traces of sexual assault and strangling. His body had been strangled. Another casualty was a 12-year-old girl named Jill Robinson. The last time anyone saw her was on December 22, 1976, when she drove away from her house in Royal Oak after a disagreement with her family. The next day, her body was found beside Interstate 75. She had been shot in the face, which was an unusual circumstance in comparison to the other killings that had occurred throughout the day. A young girl named Christine Mayelich, who was 10 years old, was the third victim. After traveling to a 7-Eleven store in Berkeley, Michigan on January 2, 1977, she vanished without a trace from that location. In Franklin Village, her body was discovered 19 days later in a snowbank, with signs of suffocation and sexual abuse. Her body had been there for 19 days. On March 16, 1977, Timothy Kane, the fourth victim, and the one who received the most extensive media coverage, vanished. Following his purchase of candy, the young child, who was 11 years old at the time, was last seen in a parking lot in Birmingham, Michigan. 6 days later, his body was discovered in a ditch near Livonia, Michigan, which was rather shallow. A sexual assault and suffocation had been committed against him. There were several law enforcement organizations involved in the investigation into these murders, including the Michigan State Police, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and local police departments. This investigation was one of the largest in the history of the United States. Although a significant amount of effort was put forward, the case was fraught with difficulties. The lack of forensic technology that was available at the time was a huge impediment that needed to be overcome. It was not yet possible to create DNA profiling, which had the ability to identify the person responsible for the murder. Physical evidence and witness testimony were the primary sources of information that investigators relied on, which frequently resulted in dead ends. The investigation focused on a large number of suspects, each of whom had a different level of involvement to the case. An individual who was convicted of pedophilia was Archibald Edward Sloan, who was a noteworthy suspect. There was a consistent match between the hair samples that were found in his car and the hair that was found on the victims. Nevertheless, in the absence of contemporary DNA technology, a clear connection could not be established. One further person of interest was Christopher Bush, who was the son of a wealthy executive at General Motors and had a history of sexual misdeeds committed against innocent youngsters. Although Bush was never formally charged with the crime, evidence that was discovered in his possession, including sketches that resembled the victims, fueled concerns about his possible involvement in the suicides that occurred in 1978. Over the course of time, a number of hypotheses have surfaced concerning the identity of the Oakland County Child Killer, as well as the reasons behind their actions. Some hypotheses imply that there was just one person responsible for the crime, while others suggest that a pedophile ring was involved. As a result of the meticulousness and caution that was displayed in the crimes, one idea proposes that the perpetrator was a highly organized individual, probably a law enforcement officer or someone with expertise of law enforcement. An unprecedented amount of control and meticulous behavior was demonstrated by the fact that the children were held for several days, cleaned, and redressed before being left in public locations. And further theory proposes that there is a larger network of pedophiles working in the geographical region. During the time that information concerning North Fox Island became available, wealthy men were involved in child pornography and exploitation. This notion gained weight as a result of this knowledge. Despite the fact that there is no substantial proof to support this connection, there are others who believe that the Oakland County Child Killer could be connected to these operations. A key breakthrough happened in 2005 when hair samples from the victims were re-examined using contemporary DNA techniques. This development was a significant step forward. Despite the fact the samples did not match any of the known suspects, they did reveal the presence of 2 individuals who were unknown. This information gave rise to the possibility that the kidnappings and murders were carried out by more than one individual. The case of the Oakland County child killer had a significant influence not just on the neighborhood nearby but also on the wider world. Fear spread across the community as a result of the heinous characters of the crimes and the young ages of the victims. For the purpose of ensuring the well-being of their children, parents became more watchful and altered their daily routines. In addition, the case brought to light the weaknesses that exist within the existing law enforcement and criminal justice systems, which ultimately led to modifications in the way that instances involving child abduction were handled. The media played a crucial part in the case, performing both the function of keeping the public informed and the function of occasionally sensationalizing the events that took place. By keeping the case in the public eye and sustaining the pressure on law enforcement to discover the culprit, the extensive media coverage kept the case in the public eye. Having said that, it also resulted in a great number of false leads and widespread fear. The pursuit of justice for the victims and their families continues despite the fact that decades have passed since the first incident. Family members of the victims, notably members of the King family, have been vocal in their search for answers. They have advocated for developments in the investigation and pushed for the case to continue to be a priority. There have been redoubled efforts in recent years to solve the case by utilizing the advancements that have been made in forensic science. The use of genealogical databases and DNA testing have opened up fresh lines of inquiry, which has given rise to the possibility that the perpetrator of the crime could yet be identified. On the other hand, these efforts have not yet resulted in a breakthrough that can be considered definite. This is it for today. If you like our content, let us know in the comments. Share this video with your friends. You have a great day.